back when I was in Russia in the 1990s, um, Putin and his oligarchs ruled the roost. They went around the world buying influence, aggressively suing anybody that challenged them or exposed them, and looked like they owned the world. And in a certain way, because they behaved in such an arrogant and aggressive way, and they were throwing their money around so much, um, a lot of people went along with it, including in London in a very big way. And so it's been a complete shock and surprise to me to see how that the world has changed, how the tide has turned, and how the world finally woke up after the invasion, the full scale invasion of Ukraine, and said, wow, this guy is a monster. We need to do something about it. And all of a sudden, we froze the Russian government money and we've frozen the oligarch money. And I think it's surprising that we reacted as strongly as we did, unexpected. I never thought that would happen. And I think Putin never thought that would happen. Putin thought that we would always be, these highly corrupted Westerners that would, say, condemn it and then keep on taking the Russian money. I think it's been a big surprise to him that it's no longer welcome in London, and the Germans are no longer buying Russian gas, and he's kind of hanging out to dry in Moscow in a lot of different ways.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. And today we are catching up with the financier and political activist Bill Browder. He's the founder and CEO of Hermitage Capital Management and was the largest foreign investor in Russia until 2005, when he was banned from the country for exposing corruption. He now campaigns to impose sanctions against corrupt individuals linked to the Putin regime and to free political activists imprisoned by it. Bill Browder, welcome back to Frontline. Thank you for your time. You were at the Munich Security Conference when the death of the incarcerated Russian opposition politician Alexei Navalny was announced, and his wife Yulia was there too. Can you just describe to us how you learnt about it and the impact it had there?
I was there. I was having a meeting in regard to another political prisoner, Vladimir Morozov, who is also serving time in a Siberian prison for opposing the Putin regime. And as in the middle of the meeting, my phone started ringing from people all over the world to tell me that Alexei Navalny had been murdered. And it was a huge shock. Just tectonic shock. And then as the news spread around the Munich Security Conference, which is it's a very enclosed space and people all very, very close to one another, it became sort of the main topic of the conference, and you didn't really even have to mention it to know that that's what everybody was talking about and thinking about. It became, it was right there. And then of course a few hours later, in the main plenary hall, was Yulia Navalnaya, Alexei's widow, who gave this unbelievably moving and devastating speech about the murder of her husband, and it kind of felt like ground zero as far as this whole shocking murder went.
How well did you know him?
Well, he had been a friend and an ally for more than 15 years. We started working together very actively after the murder of my lawyer in Russia, Sergei Magnitsky. Magnitsky had been murdered after uncovering a massive government corruption scheme. And then I began a campaign to get justice for Sergei. And one of the first people to join my campaign for justice and to assist and to help was Alexei Navalny. And at the time, Alexei was a sort of just starting to become well known in Russia for his anti-corruption work. He had a blog. He was experimenting and using all different types of social media. And he started to ventilate all of the information that we had learned about the murder of Sergei Magnitsky. And we started producing these very short videos about the various people involved in the conspiracy to kill Sergei. And he started to put those videos on his blog, which got millions of downloads. And off the back of that, he was then targeted by the same people, and they sued him and pursued him in various different ways. And oftentimes in a situation like that, anyone who helps you who gets targeted then backs off, but he didn't back off at all. He was not intimidated, and for, doing that has forever, you know, he's found a place in my heart for his for what he did, and we've remained friends and allies over the years as we've both been, from our own different vantage points, fighting Putin. And he was also a big participant in supporting the Magnitsky Act, which is a piece of legislation to freeze the assets of Putin and his cronies. And so he's been a really important part of our campaign and my life. And I'm genuinely and totally devastated by his by him being killed. I mean, it's just terrible, and for that and many other reasons.
This is obviously, and you mentioned earlier, I'm very sorry for your loss because it's obvious that it's very painful for you, and the parallels and the irony of this is just horrific. Um, his death has inevitably focused attention on your friend who you mentioned earlier, who you said you were talking about at the Munich conference, Vladimir Karamurza, who is in a high security jail in Siberia, accused of treason. He, like Navalny, he devoted, and Magnitsky devoted himself to exposing corruption, and he'd also been highly critical of the war. How is he?
Not good. So Vladimir Karamurza had worked with me for many years to get Magnitsky Acts passed across the world. At current count, we're at 35 countries. And for that work, he is truly and absolutely despised by Putin and his henchmen. And in retaliation for his work on the Magnitsky Act, they tried to kill Vladimir with poison in 2015. He went into coma, barely survived. They then tried to kill him again with poison in 2017. Again, barely survived. He suffers from the after effects of those poisonings very profoundly. And then at the beginning of the war in 2022, in March, he returned to Russia to protest the war. He went on 60 on CNN and called Putin a war criminal and a murderer. And like 12 hours later, he was arrested. And because they hate him so much, they gave him the longest sentence of any political prisoner in Russia, 25 years. They then sent him to Siberia, like they did with Navalny, and they put him in solitary confinement in Siberia, where he is right now. He's not in good shape. He's suffering from the after effects of those poisons. Um, he suffers from something called polyneuropathy, which means he can't feel his extremities. His feet are numb. Um, uh, Most doctors who know his condition and know his situation don't believe that he can survive 2 years, let alone 25 years in this prison. And most worrisome is that now Putin killed the most prominent political prisoner. The next most prominent one is Vladimir, and um, and what makes his situation particularly unique and relevant for us here in the UK is that Vladimir is a British citizen. He came to this country as a teenager. He went to Cambridge University. And of course, he returned to Russia as an opposition politician. But this country has a responsibility and a duty to him to do whatever they can to try to save his life, not only because he's a citizen, but because he's an important political prisoner who could potentially be the kind of person or the person that could pick up the pieces when Putin finally collapses and no longer is running the place.
The British Foreign Secretary is now reported to be trying to advance his case, the case for his release. What is he doing?
Well, for 2 years, I was doing everything possible to get a meeting for his wife, Vladimir's wife, and Vladimir's mother with the foreign secretary. And all previous foreign secretaries didn't want to meet them. Uh, Thankfully, when Lord Cameron came in, he understood the significance of this case, and so just last week he met with Vladimir's wife Yevgenia and his mother Elena, and as you said, he promised to do whatever he can, and I believe that he will do whatever he can. Um, Now, there's one huge problem, which is that the UK doesn't has a policy of not being involved in prisoner swaps, and that's the way in which we're ultimately going to get him out of prison. And so I've had to go on my own to other countries that have prisoners. This is what I did at the Munich Security Conference. I met with 12 foreign ministers from 12 different countries. And I said, if we can identify Russian prisoners in your countries that could be swapped for Vladimir and other vulnerable political prisoners, would you be amenable and interested in doing that? And everybody said yes. And so it's a very unpleasant and complicated situation because the British government has a policy of not dealing with hostage exchanges and prisoner swaps. I kind of have to work on this ad hoc, not as a government official, but just as a friend and an advocate for Vladimir.
How confident are you, because you are working tirelessly, that he will be released from prison, that he won't meet the terrible fate that we saw with Alexei Navalny?
I'm not confident at all. I'm absolutely terrified. I think that Vladimir Karamurza will most likely die unless there's an urgent intervention to save his life. And we've seen now that Putin has no compunction about killing high profile political prisoners. And we already know that Vladimir is suffering profoundly in solitary confinement in a Siberian jail. And I think that we have to just put aside all niceties of previous policies and use every possible tool, including prisoner swaps, to get him out. Because if we don't, he'll die.
So there's not much hope in Britain being able to help at all on the prisoner swap idea. Another thing that's very close to your heart and something you talked about many times before is the desire to put pressure on President Putin by confiscating the $300 billion or so of frozen Russian central bank assets overseas and award them to Ukraine. Lord Cameron has been speaking about that in the House of Lords in London, and he's proposing this idea because there have been so many concerns raised about the legality of this on an international level, and that holding it back, and also political concerns about it dissuading other countries from wanting to place their money in US dollars for fear that one day it may be confiscated if it happens with Russia. He's suggesting that the frozen assets could be given to Ukraine in the form of a syndicated loan or bonds that could be recouped at a future date when Russia makes reparations. What do you think of that idea? And do you think it's at all possible?
Well, first of all, I was just a couple hours ago testifying in front of the Estonian parliament because they're considering a piece of legislation to confiscate Russian government assets. And on that call, I was with a number of experts, including Professor Larry Tribe, who's one of the most foremost legal experts in the world on this matter. And I would say definitively that there is a legal path forward for doing this. And I would say there's also a very strong political path forward for doing this. And the only thing I would object to in terms of the current proposal that the foreign secretary is making is that we don't need to do these complicated machinations of bonds and loans to Ukraine. We should just confiscate the Russian money, plain and simple. I think that we're kind of negotiating with ourselves here, and Putin understands one thing more than anything, which is the value of money. And he's killed Alexei Navalny. He's invaded Ukraine. He's killed many, many, many Ukrainian civilians and soldiers. I think it would be pretty clear message to him that you do all this terrible stuff, and we're going to take your money away from you. And moreover, the budget just came out in the UK yesterday. There's a lot of pressure on government funding. Um, we should be absolutely grabbing that money instead of charging the British taxpayers. Putin should be paying for it before we pay for it. And I think that most taxpayers around the world would feel the same way. And so it feels to me like all these machinations and complications should just be cast aside. And the United States, the UK, the EU, and other allies should confiscate that money. And the legal means are there, and give that money to Ukraine for their defense and reconstruction. It's the right thing to do, absolutely, from a moral standpoint. It's the right thing to do financially, and it's the right thing to do politically. And I think that anybody who's making arguments against it, that those arguments are absolutely, all the arguments can be easily rejected when put up in front of any kind of scrutiny.
So, if there was a way to go ahead with what you desire and what you propose there, and Russia loses that money, what effect will it have?
Well, it will have no effect on the international trust in the financial system, which is one of the big fears and scares that the opponents to this plan have. The Christine Lagarde, the head of the European Central Bank, says, "Oh, people won't trust the euro anymore." Well, she obviously doesn't understand international finance because basically, if the U.S. and UK and EU do this together, there's no options for people who want to hold currency. It's not like you can hold Iranian rials or Argentine pesos and hope that your money is safe. These are what they call reserve currencies. Reserve currencies are there because they're deep, liquid stores of value, and that doesn't change. The only thing that changes is if you're a government, an evil government like Putin's government, and aggressively and unjustifiably invade and destroy a neighboring country, then that money is not safe. But otherwise, it's perfectly safe, and I don't think anyone's going to doubt it. And so that's the main argument why people don't want to move forward with this. And that argument is totally invalid.
Hmm. There's been somewhat of a legal landmark case in the UK against the Kremlin. It's been punished for failing to pay the legal costs awarded to shareholders of Yukos. This is the former oil giant, which was seized by the Kremlin in 2003. The court ruling allows the sale of Russian-owned real estate in London to cover those costs. Could this be the start of something, a sign that one day President Putin can and will be held to account?
Well, the main legal hurdle that's been crossed in this case, and it sets a very important precedent, which is that Putin has been hiding behind what's called sovereign immunity, saying that if an asset belongs to the state of Russia, that asset is protected by sovereign immunity in the same way as an embassy would be protected. And what the judge said in the Yukos case is that the Russian government is not protected by sovereign immunity, that their claim is valid and they can take that money from the Russian government. And if that continues to hold true, which I think it will, then you can extrapolate from that and say that all of Russian government money is not protected by sovereign immunity, and Ukraine and other victims of Russia can make claims. And I think that's a very important thing. And hopefully, as the legal process continues, that's what will be decided. And then the only and main argument that Putin is hiding behind disappears.
Of course, I'm expecting there will be appeal against that ruling, but we'll see what happens with that. But do you think the time will come that President Putin and his cronies will have their fortunes taken away? When you were in Russia in the late 90s and early 2000s, when that wealth was being built up, did you ever think that that would be possible? The situation that we face today.
Well, it's no, I couldn't have imagined a world back when I was in Russia in the 1990s. Um, Putin and his oligarchs ruled the roost. They went around the world buying influence, aggressively suing anybody that challenged them or exposed them, and looked like they owned the world. And in a certain way, because they behaved in such an arrogant and aggressive way, and they were throwing their money around so much, um, a lot of people went along with it, including in London in a very big way. And so it's been a complete shock and surprise to me to see how that the world has changed, how the tide has turned, and how the world finally woke up after the invasion, the full scale invasion of Ukraine, and said, wow, this guy is a monster. We need to do something about it. And all of a sudden, we froze the Russian government money and we've frozen the oligarch money. And I think it's surprising that we reacted as strongly as we did, unexpected. I never thought that would happen. And I think Putin never thought that would happen. Putin thought that we would always be, these highly corrupted Westerners that would, say, condemn it and then keep on taking the Russian money. I think it's been a big surprise to him that it's no longer welcome in London, and the Germans are no longer buying Russian gas, and he's kind of hanging out to dry in Moscow in a lot of different ways.
Mm. It's now almost 3 weeks since Alexei Navalny died. What have you been doing in that time, and how has his death changed your work and objectives?
Well, there's two things. One is I think that there should be really serious consequences for his murder. So far, there have not been. I think that one way of bringing all these points together is that his murder should be the catalyst that accelerates the confiscation of the $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves. And I think that the West should say to Putin, um, they should call it the Navalny Act, the confiscation of those assets, and say to Putin, you killed Alexei Navalny. That just cost you $300 billion. That would be a proper and appropriate response to that murder. Um, and then the other thing which has changed in my work in the last 3 weeks is the urgency of getting Vladimir Karamurza out of prison. With Alexei Navalny dead, Vladimir's next, and we need to get him out.
Bill, I know your time is very precious. Thank you so much for talking to us today. It's been good to hear your thoughts. You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. If you'd like to support us, you can subscribe now or listen to Times Radio or go to thetimes.co.uk. My thanks to our producer, Louis Sykes, and to you for watching. Bye-bye for now.